Marlon Brando noticed the object before anyone spoke. A black matchbook slid across the polished table and stopped exactly in front of him. Not tossed, not offered, delivered, not for him, not yet. The man who sent it didn't smile, and the men watching didn't blink. Brando didn't touch it, because in rooms like this, the first touch was the first agreement. This would either make him untouchable in the private circuits that ran old Hollywood, or end his access to them for good. Rewind, without relief. Los Angeles, early 1970s. A back room above a private lounge where the street noise never reached. It wasn't a meeting. It was a mechanism. The studios, the unions, the donors, the jobs and favors, everything moved through rooms like this before it moved anywhere else. And the men who owned the gears preferred to be remembered as nobody. The room had no windows, only heavy drapes and one low lamp that made faces look carved. Oak paneling absorbed sound. Smoke hung in layers, held by still air. Glasses sat untouched on coasters like someone had decided movement was a liability. Chairs were spaced with purpose, angles chosen so everyone could see everyone. These weren't fans. They were witnesses trained to stay quiet. A brass ashtray sat in the center of the table, already used, already cold. A single deck of cards lay squared and untouched, like a prop nobody dared pick up. Near the lamp, a legal pad waited with no pen beside it, no notes allowed in a room like this. On the far side, a bottle of whiskey stood half full, label turned inward, anonymous by choice. Even the ice in the glasses seemed to melt quietly, as if sound could be overheard. Brando didn't scare easily. He'd grown up around men who didn't explain themselves and didn't raise their voices. Hollywood taught him the next lesson. Power arrived as courtesy, contracts, invitations, handshakes that were really leverage. He wasn't fearless. He was calibrated. And calibration was what you needed when fiction and criminal reality started sharing the same table. Attempt A arrived politely. A fixer leaned forward, cuffs clean, voice soft enough to sound like respect. "This is a courtesy," he said. "Some people feel you've overstepped." Brando kept his hands open on the table. Doing what? Being difficult in spaces that aren't forgiving. Brando nodded once. Then they misjudged the space. The fixer's eyes stayed calm. "They don't misjudge twice." Brando's tone stayed even. "Neither do I." The matchbook remained between them like a punctuation mark. But that wasn't the worst part. Brando kept his posture loose, but it wasn't casual. It was deliberate restraint, the kind that tells the room you won't be hurried into a mistake. His thumb rested near the edge of the matchbook, not touching it, close enough to show he wasn't afraid of it. Across the table, the fixer watched that distance like it was a verdict being written in inches. Silence doesn't feel quiet in a room like this. It feels supervised. A donor at the far wall stopped rolling his ring between his fingers and held it still. A man near the door shifted his weight, then corrected himself, as if standing wrong could be punished. Someone's cigarette ash grew long and didn't fall, because nobody wanted to be the first person to make a sound. The room wasn't listening for words. It was listening for surrender. Attempt be returned with weight. An older man spoke without leaning in. He didn't need to. "You apologize," he said, quietly. "Tonight." Brando finally looked at him. "No." The word landed without heat, and that made it heavier. The older man's jaw tightened. "You're misunderstanding the position you're in." Brando's eyes didn't change. "No, I'm understanding it perfectly." A soft ripple moved through the chairs, not approval, calculation. The silence after that answer was louder than any threat. A man in the corner shifted his coat open just enough to show a badge clip, then closed it again. Not law, not official, just the kind of credential that says someone here can make calls nobody traces. Another man stared at the door as if memorizing the shape of leaving. Nobody asked what the card meant. Asking would be declaring you didn't belong. The older man slid a folded card across the table, thick black stock, no writing visible from where Brando sat. "Read it," he said, like he was giving evidence to a court. Brando didn't reach. "I'm listening." "Good," the man said, "because this is the last polite version." Brando's voice stayed flat. "Polite is a costume. I can tell when it doesn't fit." The card stayed on the table, untouched. And then the real message arrived, without paper. Attempt C came from fear, not authority. A producer, hands too clean, suit too expensive, spoke like he was trying not to breathe. "Marlon, just say the words. Everyone goes home." Brando didn't turn toward him. "Everyone goes home," he said. Eventually, the producer's mouth opened, then closed. He'd meant comfort. Brando had answered with reality. That was when the rules changed. Time began to show itself. 9:07 p.m. A watch face glinted in the dark and was immediately covered by a sleeve. 9:09, the lamp buzzed once, then steadied, as if even electricity had been warned. 9:11, two men at the edge of the room shifted to block the door without announcing it. Nobody called them security. Nobody needed to. This was the moment private pressure became a public memory, public to everyone trapped inside it. Brando noticed the smallest behaviors first. A server who wasn't serving hovered near the drapes, hands empty, eyes fixed on the table. A man with a scar at the base of his ear kept his chair angled toward the door, like he expected it to open the wrong way. Someone in the back held a cigarette between two fingers and never brought it to his mouth, forgotten on purpose. The room wasn't threatening Brando with violence. It was threatening him with consequences, work, access, reputation, the quiet machinery that could starve you without touching you. The fixer's calm didn't come from kindness. It came from certainty. He believed the room would bend Brando the way it bent everyone else, slowly, politely, then completely. And Brando understood the real danger, not a gun, not a fist. A story about him spreading through the right mouths, turning invitations into silence. The fixer who'd sent the matchbook finally spoke again. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten out loud. "You're forcing us to respond," he said. Brando met his eyes. "You responded the moment you invited me." A glass clinked somewhere by accident, and the sound felt illegal. In the pause that followed, Brando heard the building. A vent clicked once. A distant elevator cable hummed and stopped. Someone's shoe leather squeaked against the floor and froze mid-squeak, as if the man wearing it had decided to stop existing. The lamp threw a hard oval of light across the matchbook, making it look heavier than paper had any right to look. The fixer made a small gesture, two fingers tapping the tabletop once. Everything stopped. Breaths held, knees locked, eyes stayed forward. Brando stood slowly, not towering, not performing, just present. He picked up the matchbook for the first time and held it between his fingers. "If this is a message," Brando said calmly, "say it where everyone can hear it." The room froze. Speaking would expose him. Staying silent would weaken him. The fixer looked past Brando at the witnesses, then back. Finally he stood, smoothing his jacket like controlling fabric could control outcomes. "This didn't need witnesses," he said. Brando's face stayed unreadable. "Then it shouldn't have come into my hands." The power shifted without violence. Socially. Because now everyone was watching the man who preferred not to be watched. Brando didn't stand as a challenge. He stood as a reset. In one motion he reminded everyone there was another option besides obedience or chaos, exposure. He held the matchbook up just long enough for the faces around the table to register it. Not as proof, as permission for the room to admit what it had already understood. No one applauded. No one moved toward the door. The room stayed still the way a courtroom stays still after a verdict. The fixer lowered his eyes for half a second, just long enough for the witnesses to register it. Then he set the matchbook back on the table, not in front of Brando this time, but between them. A subtle retreat disguised as placement. He tried to reframe it as advice, the way dangerous men do when they don't want to be recorded as threatening. "You play men like us," he said quietly. "Don't confuse that with being protected by us." Brando didn't blink. "You confused my silence with permission." The line landed without drama. That calm forced the fixer into an ugly choice: escalate and look guilty, or step back and look smaller. In a room full of witnesses, escalation was the expensive option. The fixer's jaw tightened, then loosened like a decision being made. "You embarrassed someone important," he said. Brando nodded once. "Important people recover." A thin smile tried to form on the fixer's mouth and failed. "You're difficult," he said. Brando's tone stayed dry. "That's one word for it." The fixer looked around the room, measuring damage. Then he turned back to Brando. "Don't make a habit of this." Brando replied softly, "Don't make a habit of stepping into my light." It wasn't a threat. It was a boundary. The room began to empty in slow, controlled fragments. Men stood one at a time, careful not to appear eager. Chairs barely scraped. Coats slid on without flourish. Nobody spoke names. In places like this, names were kept for later, when they could do harm. Brando remained seated until the fixer moved first. He wasn't proving bravery. He was refusing to be managed by urgency. Down the hallway, a pay phone hung on the wall with the receiver slightly off its cradle. No one used it. The cord swayed faintly, as if it had been touched recently, then left that way on purpose. A janitor's cart sat parked like a decoy, mop head dry, bucket empty. Someone had staged normalcy and forgotten the details. Brando's footsteps stayed measured. He didn't rush to fresh air. He let the corridor watch him leave at the same speed he'd entered, refusing to let the room write the pace of his exit. In the hallway outside, the air changed, cooler, cleaner, less supervised. The corridor smelled of old carpet and elevator oil. A neon exit sign buzzed like a quiet animal. The producer who'd begged earlier hurried past Brando without meeting his eyes. He looked relieved, but not grateful. Relief was what you felt when you survived a room. Gratitude was what got you invited back into it. The fixer followed Brando into the corridor alone. No entourage now. No witnesses willing to be seen as allies. Up close, the fixer looked tired in the eyes, like he spent his life carrying other men's pride. A producer's brother runs a local, he said. Union money. Bad pride. A story in his head. Brando didn't argue. He didn't moralize. He wanted you to apologize, the fixer continued. Quietly. Tonight. Brando's voice stayed even. He could have asked. The fixer's mouth twitched, almost a smile. He did. In the only language he respects. A long beat. From the lounge below, muffled laughter rose and fell, people pretending the night was normal. Brando listened to it like it was weather. And now? He asked. The fixer held his gaze for a moment that felt like a measurement. Now I know you don't scare easy, he said. Brando replied, calm as ever, now you know I listen. The fixer extended a hand. Brando took it, one shake, no squeeze, no performance. A warning lived inside the gesture, but it stayed unspoken, trapped in etiquette. The fixer leaned in just enough to be heard. Next time, he said, don't bring witnesses. Brando's reply was quiet. Next time, don't bring a matchbook. The fixer nodded once, accepting the exchange as a closed file. He turned away without looking back, because looking back would mean acknowledging he'd been moved. Brando didn't watch him go. Watching would make it personal. He let the fixer disappear into the building's shadows, where power liked to live. Then, only after the footsteps were gone, Brando exhaled once through his nose, quiet, controlled, almost invisible. Not relief. Reset. He straightened his jacket and walked toward the elevator as if nothing in the world had tried to move him. By morning, the story grew louder, the way Hollywood stories always do. Some added shouting. Others added guns. None of it was true. What happened was smaller, and that's why it lasted, a pressure tactic dragged into the open, and a room of men forced to watch it fail. People who lived on discretion suddenly had a memory they couldn't file away. There was one detail the rumor never got right. They said Brando won the room. He didn't. He simply refused to give it the one thing it was built to extract, panic. Hidden power prefers hallways, not witnesses. It prefers private pressure, not public attention. Brando didn't fight. He changed the lighting. Later, when the last car pulled away and the drapes finally stopped holding breath, someone found the matchbook still on the table. Unlit, unclaimed, useless. The matchbook had never been the threat. The threat was the assumption that Marlon Brando would obey it. He didn't. And in rooms built on quiet control, that was the most dangerous move anyone could make. For good.